Okay, so we're going to start modeling um, very quickly, mind you, the room itself. So I'm just going to work mostly within the perspective view, just because I've practiced this quite a few times over the last couple of days. So hopefully it'll it'll end up being able to convey how quickly you can kind of get these interior scenes finished up, and how quickly you can get to a result that's really great, and also how easily you can kind of navigate through the modeling process in order to spend more time on the fun things. Um, Obviously, if you enjoy modeling, then this will be a fun portion of the project as well. But I think the focus is more the overall workflow coupled with being able to coax your eye to better compositions and better images overall. Okay, so um, again, no one modeling method is better than the other, but we typically tend to use the spline modeling technique at the office, so let's just stick with that. And I'm not going to be saying too much as I go through these steps, but they should be self-explanatory. And if you have any questions, it's best to just pose them as the class is going on, and that way you can get to a solution that helps if you are stuck. So I'm going to come over here to splines. I'm just going to go rectangle under keyboard entry. Just hit 5 meters by 5 meters. Create. Just zoom out here by hitting Z on the keyboard to see the entire extent of the room. Then I'm going to go to the modifier or modify stack tab down here and start typing extrude or EX. And you can see the default amount is 0 centimeters, but it still creates a plane. And you can segment that plane if you'd like. Just go shaded with edge faces. And for the amount, I'm going to go 200, negative 200 mil. Okay, and that's my slab. The reason I went negative is anytime I make a keyboard entry for another spline, it's going to start at the very top of that, the top of that slab. And before I forget, we'll come in here and make a new layer and call it slab. Select our slab and add it to that layer. Again, we can hide that really easily when we start dissecting our scene later on. I'll come back to default, and now let's make a new rectangle, but in a different method as opposed to keyboard entry, because we'll be using both, and I'm sure you'll be using both on a day-to-day basis. So it's good to know all of the different ways to make splines and edit them, what have you. So again, we'll keep it to rectangle, and we'll just scroll over here to snaps toggle, hit this, and you can see I start snapping to the vertices or the corner points here on the box or slab. If you right click this, you'll get some options, and these are the ones that I typically tend to use, perpendicular and vertex. You can also use endpoint, midpoint, edge segment, face, any of the ones that make your lives easier, essentially. One important thing to note though is it's much easier to model whenever under translation and options in that grid and snap settings dialog box is to enable axis constraints, and I'll show you what that does. So typically it's pretty easy to model in Max because of these constraints, and if I were to just have a rectangle, drag it out here, then that's fine and they snap great. But if I want to move it, what enabling the axis constraints does is gives you the ability to move in only one axis. So right now I'm moving in the Z axis, hit Control Z to go back here. Now I'm only moving in the Y because I've constrained that axis movement. Now X, you can see I still have my snaps on. And you can use more than one at the same time, so you can use X and Y, and it's constrained, so it won't move up and down. You can use Z and Y, so it won't in any way move backwards or forwards, and so forth and so on. Okay, so now that we have this boundary line drawn for our wall, which is around the slab, how do we add thickness to that? There's a couple of different ways to do it, and no one way is better than the other, but let's just pretend that we have a window around 1 meter by 1 meter wide. Or sorry, 1 meter wide by, let's say, 1 meter tall, something like that. We know that there needs to be a break in this line of at least 1 meter in length. And we can do that by eye. You can do it in a number of ways, actually. So I'll just do it in a day-to-day kind of way that I would do it while working on a project in the office. Come over here to edit spline so that I can actually edit this rectangle that I drew. And with the segment or line selected, I'll just come in top mode, hide my grid by pressing G, and let's cut this line here and here, and then we can place our window there, if we even need a window or an aperture, whatever it may be. So come over here to break the line somewhere around there, somewhere around there. And looks like I did something wrong, but fear not, we have the modifier stack here. I'll just get rid of that. That's why it's so powerful. Sorry, not edit poly, edit spline. We'll just select that spline and break it again there. And let's say about there. I have this selected, and I'll just delete it. So I'm telling basically what I'm doing, and you'll see this in a moment. I'm just going to select these vertices, and you can see right now there are some green vertices here. This means that these points aren't corner points, so we're going to make them corner vertices so that they all meet nicely. Scroll down here and weld them all together to make sure that they're nice and unified as one spline. And there are a few ways that we can extrude this line up. One is we can literally apply an extrude modifier. And then we have this kind of weird paper thin wall. And we can edit poly it if you'd like, hitting Shift on the keyboard, clicking down the left mouse button, and dragging this edge out. Then what you can do is add a shell modifier. We don't want it to extrude the outer face of our paper thin wall, we want it to extrude the inner face. So we'll do that by 20 centimeters or so. Oops. That seems to be way too much. Sorry, I typed 200 centimeters, 20 centimeters. You can make as many segments as you want. That's one way to build the wall, but you can see that we're not getting a wholly uniform kind of wall here. So that's kind of like a convoluted way to do it. What we often do is just draw a line or follow the lines in CAD. And let's keep both the initial type and drag type to corner so that we know that we have 90 degrees. And close that spline. We'll weld our vertices again. Make sure they are corner vertices. And then what we'll do, I'll go back, make sure we can see our slab. We'll select the entire spline and scroll down to the bottom here until we get to outline. And then we'll specify that we want an outline of 200 mil or 20 centimeters. And it goes on the outside. So we'll have to go negative 200 mil. And now we have something that looks approximately like a drawn out CAD wall. Okay, so remember how we added a extrusion to that? We'll go ahead and do the same thing. And there we have a fully formed wall with an aperture or opening. Okay, so now we know that windows typically aren't, unless you're really, really lucky, they aren't floor to ceiling in height. There's always, or typically, especially in a room or a residential unit or home, which we're trying to convey, there's going to be a the aperture isn't going to affect the entire wall. It's just going to affect a portion of the wall, kind of like a cutout. So how do we fill that in? Now, there's a couple different ways to do it. We can, up until this point, we've been spline modeling. We can go back to what we did previously, which was poly modeling, which is basically modeling with polys. So faces here, these instead of the splines themselves, although there's still a way to manipulate splines within poly modeling. So I can show you how that's done, and typically it's done by adding an edit poly, going to edge so that you can select all these edges in the walls. And we know that there are basically 3 points of division, so there will be, we want the wall to continue here and continue here, and there to be a cutout around here for the window. And this works really well because you can go ahead and edit the entire thing after the fact, which is quite handy. Alternatively, you could draw out another spline, extrude it negatively down here, and then, well, why don't I just actually show you? So I'll snap here, I have this rectangle drawn out, we'll go extrude, and let's say it extrudes up about 60 centimeters or so, maybe about 80 centimeters. And then we can hold shift, just copy that. And then we can place the window within this. But then these aren't connected in any way. They're totally separate entities. Again, if you wanted to make sure that they were not connected, but at least attached to a greater edit poly, you can go down here with the wall selected, click attach, and then you have those portions. But they aren't truly kind of attached. But that's kind of beside the point. We don't really need a true attachment because we're going to be editing this. But if you do want to go in by hitting 1 on the keyboard and accessing your vertices, you can make that window wider. If I want to edit the polygons, you can make this boundary shorter. And the point isn't about exact measurements. I mean, we don't need this window to be exactly 1 meter, 1 meter wide by 1 meter tall. We can approximate it to get the best results that we're after for the end image, which I would highly encourage, as opposed to, trying to pinpoint exact measurements. Just do what looks right, unless there's information conveyed to you by the client to do something specifically, which there often is, obviously. We typically have a great deal of constraints when we do things. So I'll just go back here. So that's one way to kind of model these things. Delete my rectangle. Another way is to go within the edit poly itself, select edge, connect these edges, or select these edges, sorry, and then scroll down to, sorry, I can never remember where it is, to connect, hit the connect settings, and you'll see that it adds a segmentation in this entire wall. But we want 2. Now this, I find a lot of people actually model like this, and that's fine. But what happens is you're ending up creating a lot more polys. So you don't really even need these, and you're segmenting. So instead of having 1 great big poly here, the way that we did it before, you now have 3. And you have 3 on this side, and 3 on that side. So instead of having 2 polys, you now have 6. So you can see how these things start to add up. It does become handy if you want to punch out another window, maybe over here, down the line, or punch out a door over here. But what ends up happening is, if you want to move that window down like we were doing before, you have to make sure that you select all these vertices or all these segments, because otherwise you're going to get some funky geometry. Once that's done, and that's connected, you can scroll back up to the selection, select this face, scroll back down, and hit bridge. And essentially you're ending up with the exact same thing that we had before. So it depends on how you like to model. If this room had lots and lots of cutouts, then maybe this would be the most advantageous way to go. But I think in terms of saving time in the long run, and saving render time by kind of alleviating the amount of polys you have in a scene, it's probably best to use the method that we were using before. So I'll just delete that edit poly, add another one because I want to attach those rectangles again. enable my snaps. And extrude negatively, let's say 500 mil. We'll copy that.